Ukraine is striking deep, and delivering a message that Vladimir Putin has absolutely no desire to receive. Russia is on the back foot. Everything bearing a Russian insignia in the occupied territories and beyond is now a viable target, as Ukraine unleashes a brutal and methodical new offensive doctrine that is shattering the rear, paralyzing the front lines, and systematically dismantling everything Russia has painstakingly assembled. Medium-range strikes have arrived, and Ukraine is wielding them to make 2026 the year of Russia's most devastating losses yet. If Putin was waiting for a message, the Magyar birds delivered it, in an April 16 post on X that left absolutely no room for ambiguity. Ukraine has developed a new strategy that Russia simply does not have the tools to counter. "Worms," declared the drone unit. "We're just warming up the engines. Buckle up. It's about to go all the way down your throat." These are certainly words that foreshadow what is coming. But they are also words that will reverberate through the corridors of the Kremlin like a thunderclap, because they arrived on the heels of a nocturnal strike campaign against Russian equipment and infrastructure in the occupied territories unlike anything Russia had previously endured. Overnight into April 16, Ukraine delivered a crushing series of blows to Putin's war apparatus. On the operational agenda, 16 military targets spread across Donetsk, Crimea, and into Russian territory itself, each one selected with surgical precision to degrade Russia's capacity to prosecute its anticipated spring offensive. We will examine the specifics momentarily, but the target list included air defense systems linked to Russia's Iskander ballistic missiles, obliterated fuel depots, and crippled Black Sea Fleet logistics. If it was Russian and within operational range, Ukraine hit it that night. And it accomplished all of this using medium-range drones that are rapidly emerging as the decisive game-changer Ukraine has needed to fundamentally alter the war's trajectory. The momentum in this conflict is shifting, and the raw footage tells us precisely why. In Donetsk and Crimea, the formidable ASAP First Corps is deploying FPV drones against key logistical installations. In footage shared by Anton Geshenko on X, we witness exactly what Ukraine's drone operators see through their screens: stunning, high-definition, full-color imagery of unmanned aircraft penetrating deep into occupied Donetsk, systematically targeting Russia's logistical backbone. Russia's air defense network is powerless to intervene. Strike after strike, the drones find their marks, destroying convoys, disabling armored vehicles, scattering troop concentrations, and dismantling every component of the supply network that Russia depends upon to sustain its forward momentum. Ukraine's drones can now venture deep enough, and navigate with sufficient accuracy, far behind enemy lines to eliminate convoys traveling along the critical supply arteries that Russia needs to make its spring offensive viable. The Magyar birds shared an additional 6 minutes of footage in their post, demonstrating that trucks and infantry are far from the only targets in Ukraine's crosshairs. The pattern repeats itself with relentless consistency. Deep within the occupied territories, Ukrainian drones continue to locate and neutralize their objectives. Rarely does any evidence of functioning Russian air defenses appear to protect the infrastructure Putin desperately needs to keep his offensive machinery operational. What we do observe instead are those very air defense systems being obliterated in substantial numbers, destroyed by the precise category of weapon they were deployed to intercept. Fires erupt. Structures collapse into smoke and flame. If it is Russian and can serve in any capacity to sustain the Kremlin's war machine, it has become a designated target for the drones that Ukraine has refined and mastered with extraordinary dedication. What all of this footage collectively reveals is the foundational key to Ukraine's path toward victory in this war, and that brings us directly back to the overnight operations of April 16th. On the 16th day of April, Putin's most formidable adversary delivered to him 16 shattered targets across his military apparatus. We begin with Donetsk, the focal point of a Russian spring offensive designed to establish a new fortified defensive belt. Donetsk is the region of Ukraine that Putin covets above all others. Mineral-rich, long claimed by the Kremlin as historically Russian territory, Donetsk has been the centerpiece of the maximalist demands Putin has articulated as preconditions for any declaration of peace. Ukraine has no intention of surrendering the territory Russia is bleeding itself dry to capture. On April 8, it was confirmed that Russia is absorbing 316 casualties for every single square kilometer of Donetsk it seizes. That figure will only escalate as Ukraine continues to execute a medium-range strike strategy that reached its most destructive expression yet on April 16. Among the Donetsk targets featured in the Magyar Birds footage was an OSAAK air defense system that Russia had stationed in the occupied settlement of Vodiane. Ukraine also directed strikes at Russia's Rubicon unit, a specialized formation created explicitly to serve as Putin's most sophisticated drone warfare specialists. Rubicon aspires to become what Ukraine has already proven itself to be, the undisputed master of unmanned aerial combat. On April 16, Ukraine struck an unmanned aerial vehicle facility in Holyuka that Rubicon had been utilizing as both a drone storage depot and an operational workshop. The first separate center of the Ukrainian unmanned systems forces executed this particular attack, and in doing so, it has effectively crippled Russia's own drone strategy, at the precise moment Ukraine is asserting its dominance, with its strikes against the Russian rear. As air defense systems and drone facilities burned across Donetsk, the night's destruction was only accelerating. Ukraine had simultaneously turned its full attention to Crimea. Illegally annexed by Russia since 2014, Crimea was once one of the cornerstones of Putin's broader strategy in Ukraine, a peninsula that was supposed to sit comfortably beyond the effective range of any weapon in Ukraine's arsenal. Crimea was designed to function as a staging ground where Russia could concentrate troops and material, ferrying them across the Black Sea and onto the Ukrainian mainland at will. But across 4 years of intensifying warfare, Ukraine has grown more powerful, developed more capable weapon systems, and rendered the Black Sea routes that once defined Russian naval strategy virtually unusable, by a fleet that has now forfeited a third of its warships and been compelled to abandon its primary Crimean port. On April 16, Ukraine demonstrated once again that Crimea is no longer a sanctuary, and its target selection covered the entire peninsula. More Russian air defense systems were eliminated. The Magyar Birds confirmed that Ukrainian drone operators neutralized a pair of deployment bases for Russia's Iskander missile systems, the very platforms that Russia routinely incorporates into the aerial barges it launches into Ukraine from Crimean territory. Ukraine has been steadily improving its ability to intercept Iskanders before they reach their intended targets. In an April 15 engagement, Ukraine successfully neutralized 3 Iskander missiles in under an hour, a display of air defense proficiency that Putin never anticipated Ukraine could develop. But Ukraine understands that neutralizing Iskanders at their point of origin is fundamentally more efficient than expending costly interceptor missiles to destroy them in flight. That is precisely what we witnessed in Crimea. Precision strikes against the bases from which Russia launches its ballistic missile salvos. Eliminate the launch platforms, and Russia has fewer options. Fewer options translate directly into aerial assaults that Ukraine's defenses can manage more effectively. There is unmistakable strategic architecture behind the destruction. Ukraine's strikes are never random. Those strikes were made achievable in part because Ukraine has devoted considerable effort to systematically dismantling Russia's air defense network across Crimea. April 16 was entirely consistent with that campaign. Beyond the Iskander bases, Ukraine destroyed a Panzer S-1 air defense system in Feodosia and an ammunition depot serving the remnants of the Black Sea Fleet in Mysaria. One less air defense system available for Russia to deploy against future Ukrainian strikes, and yet more ammunition lost by a fleet that has already been rendered tactically inert by Ukraine's sustained campaign against it. And there was considerably more still to come. More missiles neutralized, more air defense systems eliminated, more ammunition reserves consumed in flames on April 16. But Ukraine also targeted the most strategically precious commodity Russia possesses in Crimea. Liquid gold went up in flames as Ukraine struck oil depots across the peninsula. Ukraine's 9th Battalion of the 414th Brigade played an instrumental role in the Crimean strikes, targeting a pair of fuel installations, Glybokha and Oktyabrskoye, as part of Ukraine's ongoing strategic campaign to make it operationally impossible for Russia to move petroleum and fuel to its frontline forces, or to sell it to the nations supplying additional revenue to the Russian war effort. These depot strikes represent the latest chapter in a broader campaign against Russian energy infrastructure that has extended to the Baltic Sea region, where facilities have been burning for weeks. Ukraine has shown no signs of relenting on that northern front either. Just 2 days after the Crimean oil depots were set ablaze, reports confirmed that Ukraine had conducted a strike against Vysotsk port in the Leningrad region. Russia appears to have no safe corridor remaining through which it can reliably move its oil to where it is needed most. Ukraine was not finished with Russian fuel infrastructure after April 16. On April 18, the Kyiv Independent reported that a sequence of explosions had shaken the port city of Sevastopol, the former home port of the Black Sea Fleet, before it was driven out by Ukraine's relentless pressure. The city's remaining oil storage facilities have now entered Ukraine's operational crosshairs, and one of those depots was set ablaze by Ukrainian drones scoring direct hits. This is Ukraine's hallmark double-tap doctrine: strike hard, then follow up immediately against the same category of target, or against adjacent infrastructure, to demonstrate to Putin that whatever defensive measures Russia believes it has in place are categorically insufficient. Ukraine's drones penetrate those defenses. When they do, the consequences are invariably catastrophic. And as though the comprehensive assault on Crimea had not already inflicted sufficient damage on the Black Sea Fleet, the final strike of the sequence eliminated an additional ammunition depot serving that fleet. The Black Sea Fleet has already been expelled from Sevastopol. On April 16, it lost fuel reserves that were supposed to keep it operational, and weapons it had earmarked for deployment against Ukrainian targets. When Ukraine possesses drones capable of neutralizing what was supposed to be Russia's decisive naval advantage, the question practically answers itself: who needs a conventional navy? By this point, Russia's military command structure across the occupied territories would have been operating in a state of exhausted disbelief. Ukrainian drones had been finding their marks with relentless precision. But if Russia harbored any expectation that the destruction of its assets in Crimea would finally bring some measure of relief, that expectation was swiftly and brutally extinguished. Ukraine was not finished. In Zaporizhzhia, another region Putin has designated as a priority target in his spring offensive, a Buk M1 air defense system in the occupied settlement of Vasilivka was struck and eliminated. Anyone familiar with Ukraine's operational patterns understands what comes next. When an air defense installation is destroyed, it invariably means it was guarding a target that Ukraine has already identified for a subsequent strike. With the Buk M1 removed from the equation, Ukraine now possesses the aerial corridor it requires to execute the next phase of that operation. And then, finally, the occupied regions of Ukraine had endured everything the night had to offer, but Ukraine's operational agenda still had one final entry. One last target remained on the list for April 16, and this one was located not in Donetsk or Crimea, but on Russian territory itself, in the Krasnodar Krai region, near the settlement of Tuapse. The commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, Robert Brovdy, offered measured comments at the time of initial reporting, indicating that full operational details would be released by the Ukrainian General Staff once the outcome had been thoroughly assessed. Those details have since been confirmed, and they represent catastrophic news for Russia. The Kyiv Independent reports that Ukraine's drone strike into Tuapse has transformed an oil refinery in that region into what eyewitnesses are describing as a volcanic eruption of fire, visible from the surface of the Black Sea itself. The facility, owned by Russian energy giant Rosneft, ranks among the 10 largest refineries in the entire Russian Federation. Ukraine struck its fuel storage tanks directly. The Krasnodar Krai regional governor, Veniamin Kondratyev, promptly produced the standard official explanation: drone debris was responsible for the devastation. Of course it was debris, Veniamin. Somehow the most aerodynamically precise fragments of wreckage in recorded history managed to scatter themselves across an entire refinery complex, triggering catastrophic fires that consumed a facility processing 12 million tons of petroleum products annually and accounting for up to 10% of Russia's total petroleum exports. If we are to believe the Russian government, the world's most accurate debris has struck yet again. Sarcasm aside, this was unambiguously a direct hit for Ukraine, and it brought a harrowing 24-hour campaign of destruction to its devastating conclusion. Worms indeed. Ukraine delivered its message, and it backed that message with annihilation on a massive scale. Russia can only brace itself for what Ukraine has already promised is coming next. What we are witnessing here is Ukraine constructing upon a deep strike strategy that was already generating significant problems for Russia, now elevated by a fundamentally new operational campaign. The occupied territories are no longer sanctuaries. Targets that Russia confidently assumed lay beyond Ukraine's reach are being systematically struck. And it is all made possible by Ukraine's development of an entirely new category of strike capability, its medium-range drone campaign. An additional detail revealed by Brovdi adds important context. All of these coordinated strikes were made possible because Ukraine has created something genuinely new within its unmanned systems forces, a deep strike coordination center designed specifically to integrate long-range assets against high-value target sets. Open-source reporting suggests, and we can reasonably infer, that this center is the organizational architecture behind the extraordinary coordination that enabled 16 simultaneous strikes across multiple operational theaters on April 16. Brovdi has understandably disclosed nothing further. He has no intention of providing Russia with intelligence that might inform its defensive preparations for the next wave of strikes Ukraine is already planning. But what we can confirm with certainty is that what unfolded on April 16 is the direct product of Ukraine developing a medium-range strike capability that it has lacked for the majority of this war. Ukraine has been at the vanguard of drone development since Putin launched his full-scale invasion. The short-range drones Ukraine pioneered have become an indispensable fixture of frontline combat and have permanently redefined our understanding of ground warfare. Ukraine subsequently complemented that revolution with the development of deep strike drones now capable of reaching targets hundreds of kilometers inside Russian territory. But for an extended period, Ukraine lacked drones capable of operating effectively in the intermediate range, the crucial middle ground. Short-range platforms could not travel far enough. Long-range platforms were too strategically valuable to allocate against targets of secondary priority. A persistent gap existed at the heart of Ukraine's drone strategy. That gap has now been closed. The Atlantic Council reports that Ukraine launched a concerted effort to address this gap in early 2025, beginning the development of a mid-range campaign targeting the 20 to 300 kilometer operational band, command nodes, warehouse complexes, air defense installations, missile launch sites, and a comprehensive array of additional high-value targets. The target profile identified then maps precisely onto what we witnessed on April 16. Ukraine has been systematically constructing mid-range drone platforms that are more cost-effective than their long-range equivalents while delivering the appropriate scale of destructive force against Russia's near-rear infrastructure. The preceding 12 months have represented the decisive turning point. Between March 2025 and March 2026, Ukraine executed 365 mid-range strikes, precisely one per day, with uninterrupted consistency. Half of those engagements were directed specifically at Russia's air defense systems in the occupied regions. The Atlantic Council's assessment confirms that we have now entered April 2026, and what we have just witnessed constitutes a deliberate and calculated escalation of the mid-range campaign that was initiated approximately 1 year ago. The rationale behind concentrating half of Ukraine's strikes on Russian air defenses is not incidental. It is the structural backbone of the entire strategy. This is a systematic, sustained campaign to methodically dismantle the defensive architecture Russia has erected to shield its most valuable assets in the occupied territories. Every air defense system that is eliminated opens a new corridor to an even more lucrative target: an oil storage facility, an unmanned aerial vehicle hub, an ammunition reserve. All of these targets are now being struck because Ukraine adopted a calculated, sequenced approach to its mid-range campaign. The technology has been years in development. It is now beginning to demonstrate its full potential. For Russia, the strategic implications are nothing short of catastrophic. It means that the kill zones already consuming Russian troops in staggering numbers have been dramatically expanded. Earlier in 2025, Russian soldiers already faced considerable peril. Ukraine's drone-saturated kill zones extended up to 50 kilometers beyond the front, meaning any advancing infantry was required to traverse an absolute killing field strewn with the destroyed equipment and casualties of their predecessors just to approach within range of Ukraine's primary defensive positions. But now, with the advent of Ukraine's medium-range platforms, those kill zones have tripled in size. Troops positioned in the near rear are now viable targets. They are being neutralized before they can even enter the original forward kill zones, in what has evolved into a multi-layered drone attrition strategy for which Russia has developed no credible countermeasure. It is a campaign with no identifiable terminal point, and it is beginning to generate consequences that transcend the purely military domain. According to the Institute for the Study of War's April 17 battlefield assessment, There is mounting societal discontent within Russia over the scale of the sacrifices being extracted from the Russian population to prosecute Putin's war. The ISW cites findings from the All-Russian Public Opinion Research Center, the Kremlin's own state-owned polling agency, which has recorded 6 consecutive weeks of declining approval ratings for Putin. Those figures dropped from 72.9% to 66.7% between the week of March 2nd through 8th and the week of April 6th through 12th. Following what Ukraine executed on April 16th, the probability that those numbers will decline further appears considerable, particularly in Tuapse, where a major refinery continues to burn. And that is precisely the point. Ukraine's medium-range campaign is fundamentally about eroding Russia's structural capacity to wage war. Eliminating assets deep behind the front lines means the assaults Russia launches at the front arrive with diminished weight and reduced supporting firepower. Diminished results produce higher casualty rates. Higher casualty rates compel the Kremlin to feed yet more of Russia's citizens into the grinding attrition of the front. After 4 years of relentless conflict, the Russian population is beginning to reach the limits of its tolerance. That is the strategic genius underlying Ukraine's operational approach. If Putin remains so consumed by his imperial ambition to absorb Ukraine that he refuses to bring an end to a war that has already exacted such an enormous toll from his country, it may ultimately be the Russian people themselves who impose that ending. Russian state-owned polling organizations, which can be assumed to present figures in the most favorable possible light for the Kremlin, are already registering deepening popular frustration. As Ukraine continues to degrade Russia's military capacity, that discontent will intensify. Putin may find himself confronting an entirely different category of conflict, one originating not from Kiev, but from within Russia's own borders. That may prove to be the confrontation he is least equipped to survive. As for the front itself, that is a confrontation Putin is visibly failing to win right now. Building on its mid-range strike campaign and a range of complementary strategic initiatives, Ukraine has reclaimed substantial territory while effectively bringing Russia's much-heralded spring offensive to a standstill. Putin's ambitious operational plans for 2026 are fracturing across every axis simultaneously. What we are observing here is not merely a tactical success on a single night. It is the maturation of a comprehensive military doctrine that took years of development, battlefield adaptation, and technological innovation to reach this level of operational effectiveness. Ukraine identified the gap in its strike capability. It committed to closing that gap. It built the platforms, established the coordination infrastructure, trained the operators, and mapped the target sets. And on the night of April 16th, all of those years of preparation converged into a single, coordinated campaign of destruction that struck 16 targets across multiple theaters in a single operational window. Russia had no answer for it that night. It has no structural answer for it going forward. And Ukraine has made clear, through the words of the Magyar birds and through the actions of every drone unit that took to the skies on April 16th, that this was not a singular event. It was a demonstration. And the next wave is already being prepared.